This morning is by Brother Derek. He graduated from Missouri State University in spring of 2005. He then attended the Bible Institute in Missouri and graduated from there in 2007. Him and his wife, Vanessa, have 4 kids. Seems like he was adding a kid every year, but he kind of stopped on me, so it's no more than 4 now. He works with the Camden congregation. Since November 2011, he has served with the Conway Church. Beginning in 2019, he also taught junior high and high school math, English, and Bible at the Cross Christian School. Derek?
Good morning, church family. It's good to see everybody at the 39th Street Church and also from all around. So excited to be here. I'm sorry I had to miss out on all the fun last year. I had an opportunity, though, my last week for being away and speaking. I had a congregation, actually the Liberty Church in Bell, had asked me to do a meeting, and that was my last slot that I had reserved for the year. And I was really excited to do that, though, because my dad was reserved for that week a few years back. So that's why I didn't get to see you guys last year, but I appreciate the invitation to be back, and it is super to see everybody. I think it's safe in saying that we share a commonality with one another, that we all want to build better, stronger, more godly homes, and that's why we're here this week. And hopefully through these studies, we will be able to accomplish just that. But for our first one, we're going to be looking at the foundation of a godly home, and that is a marriage that is made in heaven. We're going to be looking at the 19th chapter of Matthew. If you'd like to follow along in your own copy, that's terrific. If you would like to be lazy, as I will be, and you can just follow right along with the screen, and that's helpful as well, hopefully, for some of you mothers juggling out there. Maybe it's not as much for the class hour, but later on for a sermon one. But we're going to be looking at 2 eligible people for marriage, a marriage designed by God in heaven. Now, in Matthew 19 is a great text on what a marriage should be and what God has in His thinking behind a wedding ceremony and all that is to follow for the rest of 2 people's lives. If you have questions about marriage, you have come to the right place, because actually the reason that this teaching is given in Matthew 19 is because of questions that people had about marriage. We will not start, though, on the questions. We will get to there when the time is right. But we're going to begin with a declarative statement by the Lord. Excuse me. If every now and then my voice cuts in and out, don't worry about it, okay? I'll get back eventually. I had a sickness about 4 weeks ago. Some of you may have had that stuff too, and it comes and goes, but it gets stronger again. Matthew chapter 19, verse 4. Jesus answered and said to them, "Have ye not read that he which made them at the beginning made them male and female?" Who are 2 eligible parties for marriage? It might sound a little silly starting at this place, but with our world, I'm afraid that we have to begin at this place. We understand male and female, but I think today we've got to back up even more than that. We recognize it's Adam and Eve, the names of the first 2 people, but we need to back up from there. Them. Who are the them? It's not good grammar. But who are the them in that passage? It's 2 human beings. 2 human beings. I say that because you look around the world and you see some pretty wild things. And these are no joke. You're welcome to look them up and research them for yourself, as I've done. But there's the guy in Germany who married his cat. There's the man in India who married his dog. Crossing national borders, there is the British woman who married the Israeli dolphin. So the story behind that, in case you're interested, is she visited this resort and she saw this aquatic creature. She'd never seen anything like it. The love of her life, swimming out in the water. And she found an excuse over the next couple of years to make return trips, and then she finally just decided to tie the knot with her aquatic friend. And I've saved the best for last. 2 7-year-old girls in India who married 2 lucky frogs. That's no joke. 2 7-year-old girls, I'm going to guess it wasn't their choice, that married 2 frogs. God has the rules for marriage that He does because He wants us to lead the happiest lives possible. And the Creator of human beings understood, and that's why He brings all the animals before Adam, and He names them all, but Adam's a little disappointed because there's no one who's like what he is. And so that's when God places the deep sleep on him, brings out the rib, and He makes someone as he, and 2 human beings are brought together in the first marriage. And not just human beings, but two human beings of the opposite gender. Now, thankfully, we don't have as much of this going on in our country yet. And I emphasize that. And if you don't believe it's coming and much stronger, just look in our educational facilities all across our country, when all sorts of young human beings are confused about whether they're human beings or cats or dogs or what other animal you want to suggest. This is something with which we have had a problem for some time now in our country. Men marrying men and women marrying women. The designer of marriage looked down and understood that there will be two human beings, and I have created genders. And I know that's a four-letter word in our nation and around our world anymore. But it's a beautiful term in the sight of God. Gender. God made two genders, and are not 68 or whatever they're supposed to be now. There are only two. And He made them distinct from one another. And in marriage, there is to be one of the opposite gender coming together. Now, we might suggest to this, yeah, I get it, but back on June 26th of 2015, the United States Supreme Court said there is no issue with a man marrying a man or a woman marrying a woman. And I agree, the U.S. Supreme Court said that. But I disagree in that the Supreme Judge of Heaven has said that it's not to be that way. And that there's one man and one woman who are to come together for marriage. And at that, one eligible man and one eligible woman. Carry down in Matthew 19, this time in the 9th verse, the Lord continues, "And I say unto you, whosoever shall put away his wife, except it be for fornication, and shall marry another, committeth adultery. And whoso marrieth her which is put away, doth commit adultery." God wants two people who have never, a male and a female, who have never been married before, to come together in marriage and to spend their lives with one another. Now, there is one exception to this rule, and that is if there's a party that has been divorced or who has initiated the divorce, and that person is innocent and held true to the marriage vows, but the other person didn't and cheated on that spouse, then that one, God admits, and we'll get more to it in a little bit, but not too deeply, Tony. If you want to know all of the nuances of this subject, you need to come Thursday night, because I'm not getting into all of those. but I agree, in Matthew 19, I have to lightly hit on these things. If the divorce has taken place on the grounds of the opposite spouse's unfaithfulness to the marriage bond, then that person does have a right to remarry again. I realize you look at U.S. law, and you're going to find that anyone who's been divorced any amount of times and for any reason has the right to remarry anyone that he or she pleases. I agree, U.S. law states that to be the case. However, I disagree in that heaven's law states that's not to be the case. And therefore, if we're going to have a marriage that's ordained and approved of by God, we must follow His marriage laws and not the laws, or not simply the laws, of our land. A marriage is comprised, as God defines it, between two human beings. Between a man and a woman, opposite genders, and two people who are eligible for marriage. And once you find that person, let me tell you from experience, you are ready to set off on the adventure of a lifetime. Now, God doesn't always promise us that our marriages are going to be fun. But He does promise to us that they will always be an adventure, if we will let them be. Verse 5 of chapter 19. "And Jesus said, For this cause shall a man leave father and mother." And that's where the adventure begins. But it's kind of difficult, isn't it? To leave mom and dad if you have a good home. It's tough to do. Around the time of graduation, I had a lot of friends who could not wait to get out of their homes. They were ready to leave mom and dad behind, and actually some did even prior to, I think, graduating high school. I didn't understand that. But it probably had to do with growing up in a godly home. I had a great mom and dad and a good Christian home. And I wasn't just ready to leave that behind yet. However, like many of my friends, I had made big plans for the adventure of life. I had enrolled down in Searcy, Arkansas. I was going to begin attending as a freshman Harding University. I even had my housing deposit, non-refundable, I might add, placed down, and I was going to go down there, and my life was forever going to change. Well, my life forever changed. It just wasn't at Harding University. I'd had second thoughts for some time. Over the summer, before starting school, my fall semester, I'd had third and fourth thoughts. And it came down to I just made the decision to stay a little closer to home. I went to Missouri State University at West Plains. I'm dating myself here, but it was known as Southwest Missouri State back then when I graduated. Changed the next year, though. And part of the rationale behind this is I got to stay at home for another 2 years, and I wasn't disappointed at all about that. I had a comfortable bed, I had a nice room, I had a large house in which I could roam. I didn't pay any rent for it or any utilities. 40 acres on which I could go out and play. I had some delicious meals that were made every day. I hate to admit this, but Mama still washed my clothes even when I started college. I had it made. Why would I want to leave? But everything changed. My first college class. Jesus says in verse 5, when you leave mom and dad, he shall cleave or be joined to his wife, and they twain, two, shall become one flesh. My first college class, I laid eyes on one of the most beautiful young ladies I had ever seen. And I'd seen a lot of pretty young ladies in my life, but what really drew me to her is her heart was twice as beautiful as her smile and her laugh and whatever her looks were. And I found myself, poor mom and dad, I was going all over the place. The guy who didn't want to leave mom and dad's house, you couldn't keep me at mom and dad's house. Wherever this young lady's going, that's where I wanted to be also. Actually, to this day, it's not any different. The sappy meter's about to explode. Okay, just to give you a warning about this. This last summer, we went to Woodland Park, Colorado. None of our family had ever been to Colorado on vacation. And so we went out west, and as most of you already know, we didn't know what a breathtaking experience. Absolutely gorgeous, wonderful. Never seen anything like it. I went up to Pikes Peak, over 14,000 feet high. We survived. We struggled, but we survived, and we made it back down. But we went out there, never been out there before, and I can honestly tell you this. I felt like in a completely strange place. I was at home all week long, staying in a completely foreign place to us, and the reason for that is I was with my wife, and I was with my 4 kids, and I found that wherever they are, I'm at home. It's not about 4 walls in a certain location anywhere. I didn't want to move back in the day from mom and dad's house, but I met this young lady, and I had no problem moving all over. We moved to, the same general area, but different places. We moved to Springfield. We moved to Camdenton. Greg mentioned that. We moved to Lebanon, where we currently reside, and it's always felt like home because I've been with her. And I wish I could tell you, I hope she would say, I know she wouldn't, I wish I could tell you that it's always been fun, our 17 years together. I would say 9 times out of 10, it's been fun. It hasn't always been fun, but it's always been an adventure. And that began on our honeymoon. We got married, Glennis, you and John, maybe Muffin also, were there for our wedding in West Plains, Missouri back in 2007. We left from there to go spend 10 days, 9 nights on the beach in Orange Beach, Alabama. And we made it to Jonesboro, I think it was 12:30. We checked in, we stayed the night there, and then we went on to the beach. And we got to the beach. I've never been a big car guy. I've learned more about it in recent years. But we get to the beach, and the first day or two of our stay on our honeymoon, I'm looking at our car tires, and I'm going, okay, I'm not a car guy, but that doesn't look good. I don't think you're supposed to be seeing wires on your tire protruding out. Yeah, it wasn't quite as bad as this one, but it was pretty close. There were 2 different ones that had wires showing. They were worn slick. And so here we are, a couple of poor newlyweds going to spend time and money on the beach that we don't have. And then I know what to do. You go to the place where people know about tires. And we go over to Pensacola Walmart, and we shop these together. We buy our 4 tires. They put them on. That was an unexpected expense. I can't tell you it was fun to give that extra money and half a day on our honeymoon to take care of this, but it was an adventure. And the current house where we're living in Lebanon, it was built in 1994. And when we moved in, it looked like a lot of the landscaping hadn't been touched since 1994. Pretty rough. And I'm a little bit particular about how things look, especially in my yard, you know. And so we brought someone over, a professional landscaper, to get some ideas. What could we do? What kind of pricing are we looking at? And it only took one visit to recognize, first of all, he wasn't going to do the job for us. And number two, we couldn't afford him if he wanted to. I knew I married a beautiful woman. I didn't realize I'd married a work mule. That young lady has worked so hard with me out in that year. We've accomplished a lot of landscaping projects together. They're not done by professionals. They don't look like professional work, but they look decent for a couple of amateurs. And it's been an adventure doing that together. Our neighbors have taken notice. The guy just across through the woods, he hollered at me and said, "Hey, Derek, when Vanessa," that's my wife's name, "when Vanessa gets through shoveling all that rock, tell her to come over here." You got it, 6:30. I'll send her right over. People are really impressed by her. Not always been fun. I know she would tell you that. But it's always been an adventure. A few weeks ago, we had a water heater to go out. That's the first time we've ever experienced that in our 17 years of marriage. And it's not one of those where it just stops working. It's one where the tank part has rusted out. And it's leaking out in the floor all through our basement, seeping under the walls. Our kids noticed it. They're playing a game. We're going down to say, "All right, that's enough, 30, 45 minutes. Time to come up," and there's water coming out all over the floor downstairs. I looked at the date of those water heaters, propane water heaters. October of 91, both of them. One was still working great. The other one finally just rusted through. Those are good water heaters, aren't they? So we called about, just because of our time, I wasn't real comfortable. Electric would have been fine. I wasn't real comfortable with the electric, plumbing, and gas, combination together. So we started contacting around 10 different plumbers. 5 of the numbers were disconnected. Only one of the remaining 5 got back to us after about 3 or 4 days. And meanwhile, with the valve shut off, it's still seeping and leaking out from what's in the tank and the line. There's a little bit of a backflow. After 3 or 4 days, the one got back to us to let us know, "Sorry, we're not going to be able to do it." And so we started what best we could, tearing out so we could, not have the continued flood and cleanup from that. Well, about 10 days later of our leaking water heater, we decided to go ahead and replace both. And $3,500 later, problem fixed. Hopefully for the next 20, 30 years. Would be great. That wasn't fun. We weren't planning on that. But I can tell you that it was an adventure. And we'll never forget it. We can choose to let problems in our marriage break it, or we can choose to let the problems enable us to grow stronger with one another. Jesus wants us to be inseparable from one another once we come together. Now, I mentioned to you that this incredible teaching that is found in Matthew 19, it begins by questions that are raised. And this is the first one that starts all of this. Verse 3, the Pharisees also came to him, tempting him. They don't have good intentions. And saying to him, "Is it lawful for a man to put away his wife for every cause?" And I believe therein lies the problem with most marriages today. That when we have the chance to talk about marriage and all the blessing that God has designed to be enjoyed within those bounds, we don't want to talk about blessing in marriage. We want to talk about cursing and divorce. And that's these people. They come to Jesus not to talk about the blessings of marriage. Hey, let's talk about the downside. Let's talk about divorce. And so they pose this question to him. Now, in their time, they wanted to divorce their wives, and the wives wanted to divorce their husbands for just any reason that they pleased. I want to give you a scenario. Guys, you married this beautiful young lady, and her heart's, like my wife's, 4 times greater even than her looks. And you thought there's no way it could ever get any better than this, and you do all kinds of fun things together. You have wonderful meals with one another. And then one week, you've just had the longest week at work. A mess. Monday through Friday, long hours. And you think Saturday, I have to sleep in just a little bit to try to catch up on some rest. And as you're doing so, you're dreaming of your favorite breakfast. Buttermilk, homemade, from scratch biscuits. That's my favorite anyway. And the gravy where it's made out of bacon grease, And then you might even have chunks of sausage that are torn up. All this is from scratch. And in your sleep, you can just smell the bacon cooking. And then you come to a little bit and you realize, oh, there's really bacon that's cooking in the kitchen. You think, oh, no, this is just a dream. And you go back to sleep. You snooze for another 30 minutes. And you wake up and you know you can smell the coffee brewing. You love coffee with your biscuits and gravy, homemade, bacon and sausage. And then you doze off again. And then you wake up and you think, what's that strange smell? And you get up and you go into the kitchen and there's the bacon and there's your coffee already poured and the gravy's ready. And then your wife has charcoal biscuits that she's made. And you see the wrapper on the counter. She just pulled them out of the freezer. They're not homemade from scratch, buttermilk like you were expecting. Now here's your opportunity. The woman you thought was perfect in every way, turns out she's not. You're not having fun all of a sudden. And that's the way these guys were looking at marriage back then. Hey, if I'm not having fun all the time, why should I stay married to the person? And here's the way ladies back then were looking at marriage. You know, I got this guy back then. It's probably mom and dad arranged it for me, but he was really sweet. When I met him, he bought me flowers every day for a week. And then we got married, and now he never buys me flowers anymore. Never goes out to the field, probably back in the day, and cuts them and arranges them for me. And I think, well, at least he's a good provider for our family. I can say that about him. His one saving grace. And then one day he comes home and he says, honey, I'm sorry, I don't know what happened. I've been giving my best at work. They told me because of budget cuts that they have to let me go. And now you say, well, why do I have him around? The one thing, the one good thing that was left in him has disappeared. That's the way people were looking at marriage back then. That's the way a lot of people look at marriage today. If I'm not having fun, then why should I stay in this marriage? I'm going to give you a couple of suggestions, and I'm going to tell you, and you could probably guess it, I don't have a perfect marriage. I never have. Probably never will. I wish I could. Probably never will. But I have a wonderful wife, and I hope she could say that I'm at least, she can live with me. Hopefully at least she would be able to say. But I can tell you that some of our most memorable times as a couple and even as a family have come when a meal has been ruined at home. There was a time that we had a men's potluck at church where the guys, you guys ever do that here, where the guys make all the food? I think that's mistake number one. And here I am, a preacher. I've got my Bible class and my sermon to get ready for the next day. You're trying to go through all this prep. Well, I need to be making something also, though, on Saturday night. I don't have time Sunday morning. And so I look and see what I have. I have tenderized cube steak in the freezer. So I throw that into a crock pot, and I cut up an onion and put that in and dump in barbecue sauce. I have no idea what that's going to turn out like. You ever eaten, not like the wet, but the dry pieces of dog food? Just curious what it tastes like? We call that the dog food meal. I took dog food, is what it tasted like to the potluck that day. We still joke about that. My wife, one time, she made, she's learning to cook more things. She made chicken pot pie. I love chicken pot pie, homemade. She made it from scratch. I was really impressed. And I cut that piece of pie and set it on my plate, and peas fall out everywhere on my plate. I hate peas. It's like my least favorite food. And we tried to pick around as best. You could still taste the peas no matter what you did. It wasn't very good. We still today laugh about that. We call Vanessa's chicken pot pie Vanessa's pea pie. To what she can make great chicken pot pie now. Listen, if a meal doesn't go exactly the way you plan, laugh about it together. And find something else around the house or go get another meal. It's not going to break you forever. And it will be one of the most memorable meals that you've ever had together, if you let it be. God forbid, but if it comes to it that someone in the home loses a good job, that's a great chance to sit down at the family table together and to reevaluate priorities and to rework your budget and then to explore together, hey, what are some possibilities we're finding online that we might be able to, go out and we can find next for work? It's a great chance to grow stronger with one another if we allow it to be so. But if we let it and we want to, we can let it break us too. It's our decision to make. So they want to know about divorce. Let's not talk about marriage. Let's talk about divorce. I love Jesus' response. And Tony, this is my emphasis, okay? He doesn't say, oh, okay, yeah, we'll talk about divorce. No, he says, I'm not talking about divorce. Let's talk about marriage, because that's what God wants. He wants marriage and blessing, not divorce and just more problems added. Verse 6, wherefore they are no more two or twain, but one flesh. What therefore God hath joined together, let not man put asunder or separate. They asked him, Jesus, can a man divorce his wife for just any reason? He says, you don't understand. God didn't make marriage for divorce. He made marriage for marriage. He brings two people, two entities together. And the word joined actually means he glues them together. I've never seen heaven's glue, but I'm going to guess that it's nothing like any of the glue that you find on earth. I have some pretty good glue at my house. There's this Gorilla Super Glue. You ever use that stuff? Not just Gorilla Glue, but Gorilla Super Glue. You put that stuff on two things, you put it together, and it's not coming apart. I was joking a bit earlier with Jeff. I have a little bit of undiagnosed ADHD like most of my middle school students. And I have this lanyard with a whistle, my keys, and a fob to the gym. And I'll hold it by the keys, the whistle, and the fob, and it creates this kind of whip at the end. And I'll go around through the day just, whipping things. It helps pass the time for me. And every now and then I'll whip a desk or I'll whip a student's bag. I make sure I don't hit the students, just so everyone knows. And finally, those two little connectors came apart. Well, that created another attention deficit issue with me. So now all day long it's kind of broken and I have to keep trying to piece them together and they keep falling apart. And it hit me when I was doing this lesson. I know what I need. Gorilla Super Glue. 2 parts. Liberally apply, put them together, and those jokers aren't ever going to come apart again. Now that's a strong glue on earth. But the glue we're talking about here is the glue of heaven. God says, I have 2 pieces. You have a man and the woman who are eligible for marriage. They say, hey, we want to live together forever in marriage. God says, great, I agree. I made it for that reason. He puts some of heaven's glue on each end, plugs them together so that they'll never come apart again. That's heavenly, divine glue. The 2 have become one. I think we tend to look at marriage the wrong way. We look at 2 people who are married and we see 2. I look at Jack and Lana and I say, well, there are 2 bodies there. That's not the way God looks at marriage. He looks at Jack and Lana and he sees one body, never meant to be separated except in the case of death from one another. Now, how do you treat your own body? I have some problems in my body, unlike you. I know everything's perfect in your life and your body. You never have any struggles physically. But I have a few problems in mine. One of my greatest problems, my wife so lovingly reminds me, you have the flattest feet I've ever seen. I say, thank you, dear. Tell me another one. You're very kind to me. No, I do. I have just straight flat feet. When I was younger, people told me, you're going to have problems with those when you get older. You're going to have back pain. And I'm young, first of all. I was young. And I was athletic. I was involved in all sorts of activity. I'll never have problems, I said. Well, now I'm not young. However, I'm still very active. Probably not very athletic anymore. But still involved in all kinds of athletic activity. And about 5 years ago, started having foot pain, knee pain, and back pain. And so I only wear one kind of shoes now. Asics are the only kind of sneakers I buy. Some people do New Balance and like Hoka's and all kinds of. I do Asics. They seem to work pretty well. All right, got it figured out. And my pains largely went away. A couple of years ago, I started getting pain exercising in my feet, my knees, and my back. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. What do you want now? And so I looked online, I did my research, and I found orthopedic inserts for my shoes. Now that's when you know you've arrived. When you wear orthopedic inserts in all of your tennis shoes, and I have them in all of them, pain went away. This last year, I started having pain exercising in my feet, my knees, and my back. What do you want from me? I'm trying to figure this out. I've given you everything, feet. And thankfully, I have some fellow 30-some-year-old dinosaurs in our congregation at Conway. And they had recently started doing this minimalist approach where they go barefoot a lot or wearing barefoot shoes. I never thought I'd become a hippie, but whatever it takes, right, for my feet. And so I've been wearing these around the house now, and sure enough, the pain's gone from my feet, from my knees, and from my back. Until the next time, probably. But I never thought for half a second, these feet that are bothering so much, I'm just going to cut them off and get rid of them. They're causing all these problems to my body. And I don't do that because it's my body, my one flesh. You understand what Jesus is saying? Look at your spouse for who he or she is. You're one flesh. And when you start to have problems that are being caused by a part of the body, you never consider, I just cut it off. Now, there are extreme circumstances. There are in marriage also, aren't there, Tony? Extreme circumstances. But you don't think, I just cut it off and get rid of it. I need my feet. If you just get rid of your spouse willy-nilly, you have ripped the heart out of your chest. And you're saying, I don't need a heart to survive. One body. Jesus wants to talk about marriage, not about divorce. But people, we just struggle getting it, don't we? We want to talk about divorce. And so they jump right back to it. Verse 7, they say unto him, well, why then did Moses command to give a certificate or a writing of divorcement and to put her away? Well, if God really wants us to be married, why did God command us? We're supposed to be divorcing our spouses. Listen very closely to the Lord's response in verse 8. He saith unto them, Moses, because of the hardness of your hearts, suffered or permitted you to divorce your wives. But from the beginning it was not so. I am convinced, as the creator of marriage discusses marriage right here, what he's telling every person is that God never wants two people to divorce. And by that understand, two human beings, a male and a female, two people who are eligible for marriage, he never wants them to divorce under any circumstance. Period. He says, because of the hardness of the human heart. Because God understands that it's viewed by human beings, cheating, to be the ultimate betrayal to the marriage bond. And because of that and to the vows, he understands and he allows divorce. Under the Old Testament, he allowed it for this one reason. Doesn't mean he wants it to take place even when cheating has occurred. Now, there are some cases where someone cheats and they just run off with that person. And what's the innocent party supposed to do there? And God understands. And he says, it's not what I want, but this person is making it impossible, and so I give you the right to do such a thing. Now, it's under the Old Testament. But I'm also going to tell you that I know of multiple people, you probably do also, multiple couples that have had cheating in their marriage and who are so distraught they didn't know how it would ever work, if it ever would, moving forward. A number of them are church members. And if you were to look at them today, you would never think in their marriages and their families that cheating had ever taken place. And they would tell you, they're not going to bring it up to you, and for good reason, but they would tell you, our marriage is stronger today than it's ever been. Listen, if you've had cheating that's taken place in your marriage, it is possible to work through it. Many people have done it before, and that's what God wants you to do. I'm convinced that's what Jesus is saying. But God also understands there are some circumstances that can make it impossible to move on from that. Not only Old Testament, but also New. Verse 9, and I say to you, it's not just Moses, it's also Jesus, whosoever shall put away his wife, except it be for fornication, and shall marry another, committeth adultery. Continues to do so. And whoso marrieth her which is put away, doth commit adultery. So what he's telling us is really from the Old Testament to the New. I don't believe anything's changed. You look back at Deuteronomy 24. God's always had this exception put into place because he understands there are certain conditions where it's difficult to impossible to move on from that. And he does allow it. But it's funny, we spend so much time on Matthew 19, verse 9, when the whole purpose of Matthew 19 was for Jesus to teach about marriage and not divorce. Because he wants us to have the best lives possible. And that takes place absent of divorce. But there is an exception for which he allows it. So the people have asked Jesus and they've pressed him, can a man divorce his wife for just any reason? The plain response is no, he doesn't have the right to do so for any reason, only for one reason, may he do so, and even then, that's not God's first choice. I don't believe it should be our first choice either. And now you have the reaction of those who have been taught. Verse number 10, he goes on to say, the disciples, go on to say, if such is the case of the man with his wife, it is good not to marry. In other words, if I'm not having fun and I can't divorce my wife anymore, then I don't even want to be married. If I can't divorce her whenever I please, that's a selfish way of looking at marriage, isn't it? And I won't speak for you, but I will for myself. I take great offense to that statement. That if I can divorce my wife at a time that I'm not having fun in my marriage, if I can't do that, it's better if I don't even marry. Have a wife, have kids. I think back on our 20 years of ministry with which God has blessed us to date. I'm sorry I don't usually get to bring my family with me, so I thought I'd bring them with me this time. So this is a little dated. It's 3 years old. Well, I think we have scheduled maybe next month for new family pictures. But I can't imagine service to my Lord without my wife, without my kids. It doesn't mean it couldn't happen or it wouldn't happen. I just don't even want to think of it. I've had so many opportunities in outreach because of relationships that my wife has built and has helped me to cultivate with people. I think about my 4 little kids, and you would think, well, what can little kids do in ministry? They're more of a hindrance than anything. I take offense to that. We have a neighbor girl who a couple of years ago wanted to start going to church with us on Wednesday nights. And she did. We have a big group of kids at our congregation. She knows some of them. And just had a great time. And one day her mom asked me, they're not church members, she said, my daughter's talking, they've been learning about it in their Bible class at church. She's been talking about being baptized. Would you be interested in baptizing my daughter? I said, absolutely. And so we sat down over a couple of different nights and studied things together, and she was baptized for the forgiveness of her sins. I got to do the teaching, but it was because of a relationship that my child had with her. A couple of weeks ago, there's a parent at our school, very close friends of our family, and out of the blue, we were eating dinner at their house, visiting with one another, and she said, my 2 girls, freshman and a 7th grader, not church members, but they've attended with us off and on, worship and Bible studies, and we had a lot of Bible discussions in each other's homes. She said, my 2 girls, they're thinking about being baptized. Would you be willing to baptize them? I said, it would be my great honor. A few days ago, Thursday night, they were baptized for the forgiveness of their sins in the Niangua River. I don't have those opportunities to teach without my children and the relationships that they built with others. It's a selfish way to look at marriage. If I can't divorce my wife when I'm not having fun, why should I even be married? We're not married to one another for selfish reasons and just to have fun. We're married to be on an adventure together. And we're married to serve God alongside one another. Now, if a person doesn't want to get married, you don't have to get married. Verses 11 and 12, but he said unto them, all men cannot receive this saying, save they to whom it is given. For there are some who are eunuchs, and they were born so from their mother's womb. I think he's probably talking about some kind of a physical defect that they have. And because of that, they choose to never get married. They can't have kids. And so, that's okay. You can still serve God and be in that state. Continuing on, there are some who are eunuchs who were made eunuchs of men. Probably the most famous of which, Acts the 8th chapter, the eunuch of Ethiopia. And while we're not told how he became a eunuch, it would make a lot of sense that he was probably emasculated to serve under Queen Candace and to take care of her treasury. And that way he's not a threat to the ladies. And that's probably the background to that. Becomes a great servant of God. We don't have this in Scripture, but history records he goes back home to Ethiopia and he spreads the gospel all over the countryside. Not married. That's all right. You can be a good servant of God and be in that state. Some believe one of the greatest Old Testament characters, it's suggested of him, Daniel, that he was a eunuch. In fairness to the text, we're not explicitly told that that's the case, but it's very possible he would have been numbered among the young men who were emasculated. A great servant of God. We never read of a wife or kids connected to Daniel, and that may be why. You can serve God if you're not married and you don't have a family, and you can do great things for him. And then Jesus closes, and we will also with this. And there be eunuchs which have made themselves eunuchs for the kingdom of heaven's sake. He that is able to receive it, let him receive it. And I think what he's saying here, each one of these can be taken a couple of different ways. I think what he's saying here is there are some people who have been divorced for reasons other than what has been stated and allowed by God, and they choose to remain celibate so that they can serve God appropriately. And I think he's probably also referencing some people have decided, I will never get married in all of my life, and all of my energies are going to go into the service of God. And that's okay, is what Jesus is saying. Paul would state that everyone has his or her own gift from God. I have a sister. I'm very proud of her. She has a severe hearing disability. I believe now she's completely deaf in one ear and legally deaf in the other. She's worked very hard in life. She has not one, but 2 college degrees that she has earned. A lot of positive things I could say about my sister, but my favorite thing about my sister is she's a devoted servant of Christ, and she has never been married in all of her life. You can do that and serve the Lord. We have no record of Paul having ever been married. I know some think he was at one point, could be. But at the time of 1 Corinthians, the writing, he wasn't married. We know that. Devoted servant of Christ. How about our Savior himself? Never married, yet the greatest servant who has ever lived. You can be too. You don't have to be married to serve Christ. But then again, you do have to be married to serve God. In Ephesians 5, there's a comparison that's drawn between the husband and wife and Jesus and his people. And it's described as being married to Christ. When we become Christians as a part of his church, we're the bride of our husband, Jesus. And we're told in verse 26 that he is sanctified and he's cleansed her through the washing of water by the word. That's an interesting remark. There's a cultural tradition behind this. Before a Greek bride would be joined to her husband in marriage, she would be taken to clean, clear waters, those of a stream, and she would bathe in them so she would be found pure, and she would put on her wedding garments, and she would go and marry her husband to spend forever, the rest of her life anyway, with him. Do you understand why God gives us marriage? Because it's the kind of relationship that God wants to have with every one of us. He leads us to clean, clear water. And when we are immersed in it, he washes us clean, so we're found pure. Galatians 3:27, then he dresses us in the righteousness of his Son. And we're ready to be married, to go to God's home, to live forever in happiness with him. The key to having a godly home is to have a marriage that is made by God. God has given us marriage so that we can understand the relationship he wants us to have with him. But before then, tracing it backward, he shows us the relationship he wants to have with us so that we can understand the relationship that a husband and a wife should have together. A marriage made by God. Thank you.